it's virtual.
Hi, my name is Paul Wicks, and I am an ALS researcher for the past 20 years, and also for the past 10 years or so, I've been a caregiver to a close family member diagnosed with a condition. I'm going to talk to you today about an online resource that's probably very familiar to many of you, which is Wikipedia, but we're really going to have a deep dive on the potential for improving the system, not just for people living with ALS, but for the broader community among whom we're always trying to raise awareness. We're going to take a really global perspective here, as is appropriate for the International Alliance, to try and understand what can be done to improve the quality and coverage of information in the area in which you work. If you have any questions after this talk, please feel free to drop me an email at the details below. So what is Wikipedia? As you're probably familiar, it is a free online encyclopedia that can be edited freely by just about anybody. If you identify that something is wrong on Wikipedia, you can be annoyed about it, or you can fix it. And the ethos of the site is that you should be bold and make edits and get involved. It's a very commonly used website. It's the 7th most visited website on the whole internet, and as a result, it comes up very high in search engine rankings. We've been seeing that it's being used a lot by AI chatbots. So, for example, if you ask a question about ALS, you may well be given an answer by a chatbot like Bing or ChatGPT that contains elements that are familiar from the Wikipedia page on the topic. It's much bigger than a traditional encyclopedia. If you had those Encyclopedia Britannica in your dining room or something like that, then Wikipedia would be thousands of those volumes. So it's nearly 7 million articles about anything you can possibly think of. It has no private funding, so it's funded entirely by donations from its users and is run by a foundation. And we've seen it become, over the past few years, a key resource for a variety of stakeholders. So one example here would be journalists. If someone doesn't know a lot about ALS and they've been asked to investigate a story, I can guarantee you one of the first places they're going to look is the Wikipedia articles. And so if that information is correct, the story will be correct. If it's not, it won't. We also see lots of its content, lots of its use showing up in medical students' dissertations, their essays, their homework even. And so if we want to have the opportunity to train the next generation of people who are going to fight this condition, it's very important this information is of high quality. So let's look specifically at the ALS article on Wikipedia. And I would encourage you, if you're watching this online, please feel free to pause this video and bring up a browser tab and look for the ALS page on Wikipedia. I'm going to be talking about English at first, so have a look there, which is en.wikipedia.org, and then we're going to talk about other languages later on. So the first article about ALS was initially fleshed out in about 2006, and because it was written by a non-specialist, as you can imagine, it sort of lent on other sources. So places like the NIH's information about ALS, or books, or a few articles that were available at the time. But one of the challenges is, because it's entirely run by amateurs and volunteers for the most part, people lack access to the recent scientific literature. And they may not be medically or scientifically trained. They may just be sort of trying to copy in data they find from other places. So relative to information sources like a large nonprofit like the ALS Association or other forms of commercial websites that have data available about diseases like WebMD, for example, you might think that Wikipedia is relatively low level in terms of its attention, but there's a few things that have changed in the past few years that have really changed that. So one is, you may remember, the Ice Bucket Challenge from 2014. And one of the things that happened during that challenge is it was going viral on YouTube, and people were saying that they were going to donate their money to ALS. But of course, lots of people in the broader space than where we work don't know what ALS is. And so one of the first places they look to is Wikipedia. And so we can see that whilst on average the English Wikipedia page about ALS was being read about 3,000 times per day, during the peak of the Ice Bucket Challenge, that went up to nearly 500,000 people in a single day, all reading that information. Just to put the numbers into perspective, we think there are something like 400,000 people living with ALS at any one time on planet Earth. Obviously, there's a much larger number of people who are caregivers, who are researchers, who might be interested in conditions, who might be friends, for example. But just the English article alone has been viewed 1 million times in the past 12 months. Okay, so that's about 3,000 times a day, just in English. And we do see spikes from time to time. There's a page views system that you can use within the history of each page. And we can see particular spikes in interest that track along with events that might be happening in the news. So if a celebrity or a sports person or something like that is diagnosed or sadly dies as a consequence of ALS, we see a lot more inbound traffic. So one example of this would be when Sandra Bullock's husband very sadly passed away as a consequence of ALS. We saw an extra 100,000 views to the Wikipedia page. And as you can imagine, these are probably people who we are trying to reach, that we are trying to educate, because they didn't know what that was, and they didn't know what it stood for. And so coming to that page might be someone's first and maybe even their only contact with knowing more about the condition. So, like I say, it's been edited over the years by a variety of amateurs. I have taken a very keen interest. I think I'm the second most involved person on the project in terms of edits and contributions. I have worked as a professional in the space for a number of years in academia and in industry, but it's important to say that, you know, I don't have any special rights or privileges. Anyone can come and delete what I've said or edit it or improve it, and it's very much a consensus-based process of upgrading the articles. However, we have had a lot of developments over the past year or two. So we've had the approval of new therapies, gene therapies, for example, in the United States. There's been an awful lot of research around genetics that's been very interesting. And something that I spotted around late 2022 was that the updates weren't coming through quickly enough, and that there was a lot of misinformation still, or vague information on the system. So I made it a personal goal at the beginning of 2023 to try and get the ALS page in English on Wikipedia to a good article status. So what is a good article? Well, this is something that is assessed. It is peer-reviewed by a committee at Wikipedia, essentially, and it confirms that an article is well written, so it's clear, that it's factually accurate, and very important that it's verifiable. So nearly every sentence that you see needs to have a citation, and ideally those citations should be to high quality evidence like meta-analyses or systematic reviews. They shouldn't just be a collection of, well, this paper said this in mice, or this paper said this in cells, and here's this clinical trial. Right, that's not that helpful for getting a good sense of what's going on. It should be broad in coverage. It should be neutral, so not trying to push an agenda. It should be stable, so not having lots of people argue about it. It should have illustrations, and I'll show you a couple of those in a moment. And if you go through all those hoops and you get through that review, then this puts you in the top 0.7% of all those millions of articles. And it means that when something's a good article, it's also eligible to be included in educational projects around the world where Wikipedia might be given out on laptops or CD-ROMs or other media than just the website that you can see. So here's an example. There were lots of changes in the text, but that's quite hard to illustrate. So just to show you an example of some of the images that are clearer to see. Before this push on improving the article, the top image on the ALS Wikipedia page was this. Do you know what this is? It's not entirely clear to me. It's an enhanced T2 signal on an MRI, apparently, on the corticospinal tract. Now, if you don't happen to know how to read an MRI and know that this is a sideways view of someone, that's not that helpful. So with the help of some colleagues around the world who helped me to develop this illustration, this has now been replaced with a much clearer and colorblind friendly diagram of the way in which ALS affects the body. And so this is the key image at the top of the page that people see. Similarly, before this push, we saw an older version of this diagram trying to give you a cross-section of the brain. But if you look closely, you might see some errors. So, for example, that's not the primary motor cortex. It's a little bit too far back. You might see there's no interneurons here. And you might see, well, this is a bit confusing, this little muscle thing. If you don't happen to know that's what a cell looks like, how would you know? So that's been replaced with this much more human cross-section of how things would work. And it's been checked with a number of neurologists and researchers to ensure that it's accurate. And it's hopefully through changes like this that will improve the quality of the education, the learning for everyone that comes to visit the article. So what does the anatomy of a good article look like? Well, as I said, it goes into detail just on ALS. We've broken out other pages for some of the mimic disorders or some of the other motor neuron diseases. These little citations here should take you out to good, recent systematic reviews. The English is about as clear as we can make it, although sometimes people are coming in and still tweaking the punctuation. These high-quality diagrams are available, and they're freely available for you to use under Creative Commons. Anyone can use them in the way that they've been developed and licensed. And so I'm very pleased to say that around the summer of 2023, the Wikipedia page on ALS was rated as a good article. So I was very pleased about that, but as is the way with people that work in the space, we get very satisfied with achieving a goal for about 30 seconds, and then we think, what's next? So what's next is other languages. So this page exists in 64 languages, quite a lot of languages, everything, some more common worldwide languages of European origin, things like Spanish and French and German, but also a variety of less common European languages, a variety of dialects from the Middle East, Asia, Pacific region, etc., etc. Well, why is that a big deal? Well, surely everyone can read English, or surely everyone can use Google Translate. Well, I can't read most of these languages, but I decided to drill in on 3 of the languages at which I was reasonably confident that Google Translate could do a good job. So if you only look at German, Spanish, and French, and clearly these are spoken all around the world, not just in Europe, if you add them together, it's about another 1 million views a year, right? And one of the challenges is that although the English page has had a lot of work done to it to make it come up to date, the other languages have not. So they're much shorter. They have the outdated images or no images at all. Their references might be 5, 10, even 20 years out of date. They contain a few facts that are just straight out wrong, so they may omit information like around cognition, or they may state something falsely and say something like ALS never involves pain or never involves behavioral change. And I think those would be very concerning pieces of misinformation if we saw them in other contexts. And so I think there's no reason they should be permitted to continue here. We also see things that are just not up to date in terms of what treatments are available, right? So we've got 5 approved treatments, at least in the United States. I think it'd be important to know about that in a variety of settings, because of course people might not we don't know what country people are doing these things from. So I think there's, a great opportunity to improve on the status of the information. And if these are some of the most common languages with many, people available to speak to them, what must it be like for those other folks? So why am I telling the Alliance about this? Well, look, I imagine, I hope that we have a shared goal here, that we want to make sure there's high quality information that is free for everyone, everywhere, that can be relied upon and serve as a reference point for people as they go on their journey with ALS. So I have a couple of different ways that we could approach this, and I'll certainly welcome further discussion. So the simplest thing to do is, sadly, to not use the languages other than English for now, because we just can't be assured of their quality and their veracity and that they're up to date. So for now, if you have any links or things like that, I would recommend you update those to be to the English article and to encourage use of translation tools. For example, Google Chrome as a browser has a translation tool within it that I think is pretty good, and that will probably get us a little way there. If we agree this is more of a problem and that there are some cultural or linguistically specific things that we should try and develop to ensure that there's more specific pages for different countries or different regions or different dialects, then actually what we might need is to develop a task force that maps these out and tries to prioritize them based on the volume of people using them or places where there's particular unmet need. The good news is there are some automatic translation tools, and I'll show you those in a moment, so you don't have to have human translators doing this all from scratch. There are ways to sort of bring across the good article into your local language and then just sort of tweak it. And then finally, whatever we do, this will become an ongoing process, right? So as we find new genes or as new treatments are available or whatever it is, we actually need this to be maintained. We need this work that goes on here to be shared broadly amongst the community with people with time and training and attention and resources to continue working on this. And it requires continual refreshing and checking. So like I said, there are automatic translation tools available. For example, that once you've done a little bit of training on Wikipedia, you'll be able to access this automatic translation tool. And so what you can see on the left is the English good article, and with just the click of a button, we've been able to translate it to French in a second. Now, the French is not perfect, and so that's why we would need to enlist the help of people who speak both languages fluently to ensure we could tweak and make sure that everything's up to date. But I think that can really get us a long way down the path to our goal of great quality information available for everybody. Like I say, I'm happy to take any questions. Feel free to drop me an email, and thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, Paul. That was really interesting. And I have 3 minutes for questions. Do we have anything on the live chat? Or maybe here? Question? Oh, there.
All right, I got in time this time. So 2 questions. The first is that there are so many different names for ALS, and like in that French translation, I didn't see maladie de Charcot, which I was told is a more common name for it in France, or at least a name. So I wanted to know more about how that's addressed. And then also, is there any kind of cross-referencing or mutual updating between languages? So, or does if you make a change in the English version, every other language has to be manually cross-referenced to update that information, and vice versa if there's new information from elsewhere?
Yeah, great questions. So there are synonyms listed, and maladie de Charcot is certainly one of them. I think in that translation it's probably coming up as SLA rather than ALS, but there will be a section down at the bottom that sort of clarifies those different things. And unfortunately, the way Wikipedia works is there isn't that sort of automatic mutual updating going on, and I think there are reasonable reasons for that. You know, different languages and different cultures might have different interpretations of certain historical facts, for example. So yeah, that's just the situation at the moment. But I do hope that, you know, what we might be able to do is do some sprints where we coordinate, or we find a small group of volunteers where we could sort of upgrade the quality of, say, the top 5 languages in one big run. And then maybe come and refresh looking at them every year or 2 years, or every time a new drug comes out. So I don't think it's not an unlimited amount of work. It's a finite amount of work, but it might require a little bit of coordination.
I think we do have time for one more question. It has to be short. No, just kidding. But you? Okay.
One of the biggest criticisms of Wikipedia is that apparently anybody can update any entry at any time. And for a kind of a page as important as this one, what do you do? What is your protocol for making sure that everything is accurate, given that level of openness?
Yeah, so that is in the DNA of the system. It does have quite a good immune system. So what I mean by that is, if someone just registered this morning, they can't delete the page. If someone goes in and says, for example, sadly, there's vandalism, and people will say, you know, ALS is caused by meatballs or something, that will usually be corrected in minutes. So it is not a perfect system by any means, but just to say that it is a community, it is an ecosystem. And what I'm sort of hoping for is that a broader cross-section of the community can participate in its development. And really, it's that you know, fact that it can be edited by anyone, which is the way that it got to this place in the first place. But, you know, I'd just encourage people to think, you know, if you are in contact via your websites and your leaflets with hundreds or 1,000 people in a year or something like that, just the volume of people who may be not directly affected in our community, but are in the periphery, are really the ones coming there. So, you know, have a look for yourself, have a look in your own native language, see what you think, have a look if you're, you know, bilingual or multilingual, see what you think. I'm currently in England, as you can tell, as there's my dad's hobby train set behind me. I will be in Basel from Tuesday morning. I'll be on the Sanogenetics booth, or look for someone slightly more smartly dressed than this. But happy to speak with people if they're interested in developing in other languages over the next year.
Kathy, you have a question?
I do have a question, and I actually thought your question was going to go this way. Paul, when you were talking about the statistics around the time of the Ice Bucket Challenge 10 years ago, I'm interested to know, and we've done a little bit of research on this, you looked at it as the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge and how that spiked. But you live in the UK, and I assume there it was called the MND Ice Bucket Challenge. Was there also a spike around the acronym MND or other language differentiators, or was it simply known as the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge?
Yeah, Kathy, that's a great point. We did look at that in the 2014 paper, and even in the UK, it was called the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. I'm British, as you can tell. I think it's time we put to bed the multiple different languages and essentially, go with the one that is going to be most informative. The internet has eaten the information space. If we all wanted to be called ALS, it's probably going to be most helpful for people to find that information. And I appreciate that neuron with an E or without an E has been a big enough issue over the past 34 years. So I don't mean to say this wouldn't be simple to solve. But ultimately, if we want to engage with people who don't want to go and learn about the ins and outs of this, we have to be more consistent in the way that we're presented. And if we are Lou Gehrig's disease and we're ALS and we're mentioning neuron disease with an E and without an E, we're not helping ourselves. So I feel like this is a sign that, yes, people did not search for the MND Ice Bucket Challenge in anywhere near, like less than 1% of the frequency that they did the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And I think that's a signal that we should interpret and react to.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.